Hi, I'm Gary Smith. This week I had the pleasure to speak with Bryan Orr. He and his dad operate a large HVAC company in Orlando, Florida. Bryan has a strong background in the heating and air business and shared some great tips on the techniques and tools and methods of how a home inspector can effectively inspect and report on a home's cooling system. I think you'll learn something. I know I did. He has a simple approach. Listen to my conversation with Bryan Orr. Thanks, Bryan, for sharing your expertise with us. Bryan and his team are in Orlando, Florida. Give us a little picture of what you guys specialize in. Residential, commercial? Do you work with energy raters? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So we do. I'll kind of start on what we do most of, which we mostly do residential add-on and replacement and residential service. That's the bulk of what we do here in Central Florida. We're kind of in the Disney corridor. It's just a little northwest of Disney. And we do a lot of work with realtors. We do a lot of work with property managers. There's a very big short-term vacation rental industry here where people are doing a lot of buying and selling of houses. So we're interacting with the home inspection industry a lot. We don't deal with a lot of raters because we don't do any residential new construction. So because we're not in that whole vein of things, we're much more interested in diagnosing things on the basis of, making them work well, not so much hitting a target number.
Right.
We do a lot of building performance actually at Kalos is the name of my business. We do building performance, but we're very rarely trying to hit a particular score or something. We're much more just trying to fix problems that people have. You have high humidity. Okay, we're going to use a blower door, but we're not going to use it to see if you're under, CFH5 or something. We're going to look at it and see, or ACH5. We're going to look at it to see, what is your number and can we improve it and where are we getting infiltration from and, are your ducts leaking and those sorts of things. But then in addition to that, we're also licensed general contractors. We're also licensed electrical contractors. We do refrigeration work at Walmarts and Whole Foods and all kinds of stuff. So we have multiple divisions in our company. We have about 80 employees. I'm the license holder on the mechanical side, and my father is the license holder on the electrical and the general contracting side. And we started in business together in 2005 as a partnership. I worked elsewhere doing HVACR work, and he worked elsewhere doing general contracting and electrical.
Fantastic. So, home inspectors are tasked with the challenge of evaluating a building using their eyes. So we perform visual inspections, and some inspectors, use some tools and equipment to report some specific conditions. But for the most part, our inspections are visual in nature.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you first, is it possible to evaluate in a meaningful way a heating and cooling system without using any tools visually? Can we do it? Can we pull this off?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And I think when we say visual, I would add in your other senses. So you're going to have to use all of them other than taste. I don't suggest licking an air conditioner, but you don't know what you're going to end up with. But other than taste, you're going to be using all of your senses. And if you use all of your senses, then I think you can easily diagnose whether or not there is a. You're not going to get down to the really fine nitty gritty details. You're not going to be able to tell that this system is half a pound low on R410A, but you're going to have a really good indication of whether or not there's a problem. And I'll give you a perfect example. One of my really good friends is he's a trivia podcaster, actually. I know him through the podcasting world up in Jacksonville, and he just bought a house, just had a home inspection, and he's starting to move in, and by golly, his air conditioner's just not keeping up. So he has a contractor come out, air conditioning contractor, and they tell him that he's 5 pounds low on R410A, a system that holds, 8 pounds, something like that. And so it's got a significant evaporator coil leak. And I said, well, didn't your home inspector catch that? He said, well, they said it's just a visual inspection. They can't catch that sort of thing. I'm like, well, I think they should call me because I can help.
Oh, good. Super duper. Oh, well, that's exciting. So how much data should we gather? How should we report? Should we be reporting humidity levels, outdoor temp, indoor temp, fan flow rate, tonnage, refrigerant? I'm seeing myself as writing a report.
Mm-hmm.
That report, I note that there is a problem. It's limited cooling, for instance.
Right.
You get the report. do you want to read that the report has limited cooling, or would you like for an inspector to say it has limited cooling and also has this humidity level, outdoor, indoor temp, et cetera, et cetera? What other data, what other supporting data could we give you as a tech for you to be able to evaluate it and not waste your time with it, or maybe be prepared or potentially rebut it in any kind of way?
So let's start here, because I think, as a home inspector, you're very rarely tasked with doing a full diagnosis. Your job isn't to fully diagnose most anything. I mean, obviously, you've got a roof leak. You can see exactly where it's coming from. That's one thing. You can say you got a roof leak right there, right? But even then, you're not going to say the modified bitumen substrate is you're not necessarily going to be able to, they're going to tear the roof up and they're going to find exactly what's causing the problem. Well, in air conditioning, it's the same thing. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you're not providing false positives or false negatives, because then at that point you did more harm than good. So at worst case scenario, right? You don't want to make anything worse. That's the first thing. And then you want your initial sort of summary diagnosis to be in the general ballpark where you're pointing people in the right direction. And so what do most home inspectors do, in my experience? They walk around the house and they've got their laser thermometer, they've got their infrared thermometer, and they start pointing at stuff and they start taking readings. And so in my experience, the biggest problem with the home inspection industry isn't that they're not doing anything. It's that often they're giving a false positive. They're saying there's something wrong with this air conditioner when there's really nothing wrong, because what's happened is the system's been off. The realtors had it set up at 82, and then you show up in the house and you start taking temperatures, and you're comparing it in your mind to another house that you just took that was running and was 74 inside the house. And so you're saying, well, those vents don't seem cold enough, or maybe you didn't let the system run long enough, and so now you're shooting the vents and they're not cold enough. Or it could just be that you have abnormal duct gains because they have an abnormally hot attic, and that may not be the fault of the air conditioning at all. And so the problem isn't so much that measurement means nothing. It's that it gives a false positive. It gives the impression that there's something wrong when there isn't. And on the other end, taking vent temperatures can also give you the sense that there's nothing wrong, and you could very well have a frozen evaporator coil. You could very well have very cold vent temperatures and actually have a system that has significant problems with it. And so there's all of these challenges. And so my first encouragement would be is that forget what you know. Forget what you think you know traditionally that home inspectors are taught. So it's not that your infrared thermometer is worthless. It's a great tool, but you got to know how to use it. And it's probably not the best tool for testing an air conditioner. I would rather rather than using your infrared thermometer, I would rather you just use your senses, if that's your only choice. If I'm given the option between only an infrared thermometer and no tools whatsoever, I'm going to choose no tools whatsoever.
No tools. But if you had a dry bulb thermometer, you could place that either near the return or near the, but again, just from my background being a semi-retired energy rater, I understand duct loss and all of the challenges that measuring air temp in one particular or the wrong place might. So if go a little bit deeper, and let's say that I am let's say that the HVAC system is a vertical 3-ton and I'm in the attic. It's stored in the attic. I'm in Mississippi, so most of our stuff here, all of our equipment seems to be, there's a habit to put it in the worst possible place, cold air in a hot attic, 140 degrees out there.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and it's sweating, and there's all kinds of other things that we could talk about. But couldn't I take, if we're talking about taking temp splits, talk about that for a second. I'll let you say the best method that a home inspector might use.
So if you're gonna go that far, and I don't even expect you to go this far, but if you do, then good on you. I'm proud of you. Take a dry bulb thermometer, take a measurement at the return as close to the unit as you can. And most of this equipment, if you go to it, you're going to find where somebody's used a dry bulb probe previously. A big piece of this, and I understand this because, like I said, my father was a home inspector for a while, is that you don't want to be invasive. You don't want to do anything that anybody later on is going to say, well, your license didn't allow for that, or where they're going to say you broke it. So you got to be really careful. You don't want to take anything apart that you don't need
That's right.
to. But in most cases, there's going to be a little point prick penetration where somebody's put a dry bulb thermometer in there before. And so the best thing to do would be to measure the temperature of your supply air as close to the unit as you can get. There's a fine line here. It depends on if you're working on a gas furnace or not. But in general, just as a general rule, get pretty close to the unit. Take it in the supply duct, take it in the return duct, and then take the temperature split there. Now, for those of you who are internet savvy, and I would imagine most of you are, there's lots of really great Delta T calculators out there. I have one on my website. And so if you want to get even more exotic, you can take the inside relative humidity and take your supply temperature and your return temperature dry bulb, and you can use a calculator in order to figure out exactly what your Delta T should be in order to dictate that the system is producing 400 CFM per ton. So 400 CFM per 12,000 BTUs of capacity.
Right.
And that's really what you're shooting for. That's kind of the whole shebang in together. And that measurement is a great measurement to take, and it will tell you whether or not you're running on the high side or the low side. In general, because we have variable speed equipment that has it can ramp up and ramp down, and has dehumidification or whatever, you generally want to see that you're about 3 degrees on either side of that, in between there somewhere. That's going to give you, if you do that, you're going to be better off than almost any home inspector out there, and that's going to give you a pretty good indication, so long as that system has been running about 15 minutes, at least. I mean, I would rather see a half an hour, but at least 15 minutes.
So as a general practice, AC is the thermometer or the thermostat set point is somewhere around 76. They're off to work, and you're there by yourself with an existing home, and they have their thermostat set up. You're going to knock it down to 72 or 68, whatever, to get it to stay on while you get in the attic and do your work.
Right. Make sure to put it back when you're done.
Make sure to put it back when you're done.
You don't want to make that mistake.
Absolutely. Yeah,
you don't want to be paying power bills.
You got it. Yeah. And that'll be noticed as well, for sure.
And so the common rule that a lot of people will say is they'll say 20-degree split. 20-degree Delta T is what you're looking for. And at 75 degrees Fahrenheit indoors with 50% relative humidity, that's pretty close. I mean, that's really close. But you have a lot of variation there. And that's where when you go to a house and they've left it set on 75 or 76, and the relative humidity is normal, about what you would expect, then 20-degree split is fine. But there is some variation there on either side. And it also varies based on where you live, and that's why if you're listening to me right now and you're in the mountains of Colorado, well, the rules are a little different there. And if you're in a place where you have higher relative humidity and people aren't running 400 CFM per ton, they're running a little lower airflow to pull more humidity out of the air, then your split's going to be a little higher. And so you've kind of got to, most of you are out there working in a particular area. And so you'll start to kind of learn the rules of that area. But if you kind of, benchmark against a Delta T calculator for a while until you get the hang of it, that's really going to give you a much better feel. Because I've seen, I can't tell you how many times I've seen reports that say, I've seen hundreds of these. System's running a 14-degree split, needs to be looked at. Well, they're taking a 14-degree split at the diffuser in the house, they're taking it at the vent, and then they're taking it at the return. And that's actually very, very common. And in fact, you will have a 14-degree split as a matter of course, even at the unit, if the indoor temperatures and indoor relative humidities are high. So
that's kind of the reason I was mentioning whether or not we should be recording. You've got an iPhone when you're doing an inspection. You can pull up the weather channel on your iPhone, and it's fairly local. Hopefully you're pulling up something local. And if you've got 80% humidity in the deep south, that's not uncommon. Do you want that kind of data along with, hey, this thing's not cooling? What would be a list of data points that might help you, or do you care about that? Is that just too far into the weeds for this simple of an issue? Because I tell you, it's not simple when we get when the buyer moves in and like your friend.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So I'm thinking about this in two different ways. in one hand, I'm thinking as an HVAC contractor, what do I need to know if you're saying that something's wrong with it? Well, I don't need to know much other than for you just to tell me I know something's wrong with it, and then I'm going to go out.
It's
And the
not
only
cool.
problem would
Right.
be is if I'm not finding it. But you're correct, because what you want to protect yourself from is the buyer then buying it and saying this thing was leaking all along. And because this is actually pretty common. The biggest thing home inspectors need to watch out for is the person who's selling their home and has the system recharged right before they sell it, because they don't want to deal with having to replace that $2,000 train evaporator coil, which is actually what happened to my friend. And they don't want to have to deal with that, so they just recharge it. And then the home inspector comes in, and depending on the space there, it may not be the home inspector's fault at all. They may have not been able to catch it at all.
Been there, done that. Yeah.
And so what you want to protect against is to say, here's the conditions under which I tested, and this is why I said there was nothing wrong with it. So if you want to be the Mac Daddy home inspector, the home inspector that every HVAC contractor will back and cheer as you go through the streets with the ticker tape parade, here's what I would request that you have. Dry bulb thermometer that you can use in your duct. You can buy them at Walmart for $12. I mean, this is just a cooking thermometer, a quick read cooking thermometer, nothing fancy. Something to measure relative humidity accurately. Now, I'm going to suggest a tool because it's inexpensive and it's highly versatile. It's called the 605i by Testo. It measures relative humidity, dew point, wet bulb, and dry bulb. It can be used. It's a handheld. It's a great overall tool that I would love every home inspector to consider buying. Super, super accurate, far more accurate than anything you're going to buy off the shelf in a normal location.
If you can give me some information on that, we'll leave it leave a link in the.
Okay, yeah, great, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, it's Testo 605i. I don't even want to guess how many of those I've sold for Testo, just because it's an excellent product. It's what we use every day in my business. In fact, if you use 2 Testo 605i's, this is sort of crazy inside baseball here, but if you use 2 of those things, put one in the supply, put one in the return, plug in at least somewhat close estimated airflow, it will tell you exactly how many BTUs that system is removing from the space. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Anyway, all I want you to have is one. That's all, just one. And inside, so that way you kind of know the relative humidity inside the space and temperature.
And so humidity and temp, dry bulb.
Yep. So here's where we're at right now. You got dry bulb temperature in the supply, dry bulb temperature in the return, humidity in the space, outdoor temperature in the shade. That would be excellent to know as well. So you don't want to get it in the, don't get it outside in the air, just in the shade. If you want to additionally measure, this is the extreme list, because that right there is a great list. If you want to have some sort of line temperature thermometer, line temperature thermometers are widely available now. There's one Testo makes one called the Testo 115i. It's just a Bluetooth little clamp. You clamp it on the temperature lines. It's non-invasive. If you give me the temperatures of those 2 lines, the suction line and the liquid line, well, now anybody can tell you whether or not that system is working properly. Anybody who knows what they're doing, without ever connecting gauges. In fact, my own technicians, when they go to spaces that we've already baselined, we've already checked the pressure, subcool, superheat, all the fancy stuff that we do. Right. I don't want them hooking up gauges, because hooking up a gauge manifold to the system actually results in some refrigerant loss every time you do it.
Changes. Yeah, right.
Sure. So I don't want them doing that. I want them taking those exact readings that I'm giving you.
So we should check that line set outside or inside?
It shouldn't vary too much. I mean, if you wanted to be real crazy, you can measure both places, but I would probably just do it outside. I would, when you're out there taking the temperature, Cooper Atkins makes a tool that has a dry bulb temperature probe on the back and then a line clamp on the front. It's about $100, and you can use it for both. When you open up the probe, then it measures dry bulb, and then you can go close it back, clamp it on the lines, and it'll give you the exact temperature of the lines. So
line set temp, dry bulb. And what was the other one?
So dry bulb temperature in the return before the coil, dry bulb temperature in the supply after the coil, indoor relative humidity, outdoor temperature in the shade, and then the temperature of both of those lines.
And that will give you plenty of data to be able to evaluate. It also would protect the and we haven't talked about it. That's the best case scenario. So we haven't talked about, we're leaving the infrared spot thermometer that measures surface temp, not air temp, in the bag.
Right.
Let's jump on duct. Talk about flex duct.
Okay.
A little bit about duct design, duct leakage. How can I take a thermal can I take any type of thermal camera or anything that might tell me and diagnose any kind of duct system in a meaningful way?
It's really tough because, okay, so there's two different factors with a infrared, typical laser thermometer, and this doesn't matter if it's a really good one or not a really good one. It doesn't. This part
Like the
doesn't change
FLIR, like
much.
I've got a $5,000 big FLIR thing. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, all right. So let me distinguish. If you've got a thermal imager, a
There you
thermal
go.
imager has more value than a spot thermometer. So a thermal imager, you can look at something and you can see a good signature. So perfect example. I used one. I did a video just the other day of a full building performance analysis we did on a 12,000 square foot home. And we're looking at the ceiling on the underside, and we're looking at the boots where they attach to the ceiling, and we can see this pattern of low temperature around the vent on the drywall. Well, that tells you something right there. Now, what I'm not looking at is the temperature of the vent itself, because I don't care. What's great about a thermal imager is a thermal imager gives you comparative temperature as opposed to just a single point. As a single point, it's not super valuable, but as a comparison between different surfaces, it's very valuable. Anything made of metal that has any reflectivity to it creates a big challenge. And this is true with flexible duct too. So when you go and you're looking at a flexible duct, either with an infrared gun or with a thermal imaging camera, you got to take really good care, because anything that's reflective, you're not seeing the temperature of that surface. You're seeing the temperature of whatever it's reflecting off of. So what I don't want to see is somebody go with a thermal imaging camera, hit a outside of a reflective duct and say, wow, look at the temperature that I'm seeing. Well, you're not seeing the temperature of that duct. You're seeing the temperature of whatever's reflecting off of that duct. That's how radiant heat works. And so you have to be really careful to know that on things like drywall, it's good. It'll give you some pretty good data as long as you're close up to it. But on anything that's shiny, so this includes, copper tubing, this includes anything that, most of the things that we want to measure, vents in a lot of cases, you've got to deal with how close are you to it. So how big of a sample size are you taking? The further you get away, you're sampling a much larger area.
The
So how
range.
close are you to it, and what is the emissivity of that surface?
Yes, right.
Those are huge factors. And for most of us in the field, it's really hard to know. Like, so you get a number and you're like, well, is this a good number or not? And so it's not very valuable. Whereas with thermal imaging, you're measuring a larger sample size. And so you're not so much caring about, is it 62 degrees or not? You care, all right, this is 62, and then right next to it, I have something that's 75. And so that comparative analysis is much more valuable.
Is even mentioning flex duct that hasn't been properly stretched worth our time as a home inspector?
It depends on the market. Okay, so this would be an example, maybe like in your market is Central Florida. In Central Florida, we have so much poorly installed ductwork that it's almost not even like, you would essentially be replacing every duct in every house.
So has every house in the neighborhood.
Correct. And so there's always this balance between, is it correct? No. How many flex duct systems in the entire United States of America are installed correctly? Probably less than 0.01%. So do you really want to fight that battle? That's the question. Right. And I think it's worth mentioning, that I've noted that. So let's think in home inspector verbiage. Noted that flex duct is not fully extended to the extent that NAIMA recommends. This is fairly common. May or may not want to address this problem, something like that. That may be some language you could use there. Mm-hmm. Now it gets more extreme though. So you see somebody who takes a bag of flex, and because they don't want to pull it, they have a 25-foot bag of flex and they want it to go 10 feet, and instead of pulling it out, they just kind of mash it all together and throw it up there. That's definitely a problem. And so when you see things that are out of the norm, then I would definitely write it up. It does make a huge difference. The one thing I'll say about flex, though, like in our market, is what ends up happening is people just start to oversize their flex in order to compensate for the fact that they're not installing it properly. Mm-hmm. So the Northerners will come down from the Northeast, and they're very opinionated about how things should be, and God bless them. And they come down and they look at our installations and they say, holy crap. I mean, you guys do the worst work in the whole world. But the fact is that if you check our static pressure against their static pressure and their beautifully designed metal duct systems, and their floor systems, in many cases, our static pressure is still lower because we're just oversizing to make up for it. And so is it a problem? Sure, there's additional turbulence. It makes it more difficult to design, not condoning it, but ultimately it comes down to, does it work? I mean, that's really what matters. Are you keeping your customers comfortable in the house? So
we know that the R22 is being faded out. That's refrigerant. We'll jump over here on the refrigerant for a second. Should we make comments about the fact that there's R22 and it's being phased out and replaced by R410A? What do you tell your clients who have the R22 system? Do you say anything at all?
Yeah, I think, obviously.
What do you do? when you're checking one,
Right.
what
I don't say a thing about it because the fact is that, the cost of R22 is going to keep going up, but it's going to continue being available for the life cycle of every piece of equipment that's out there. So a lot of people had this false belief that it was going to become illegal to recharge R22. That's the thing that you need to just get out of your head. And a lot of people will say, well, it's illegal to recharge it to a certain extent. If you got a leak, you can't recharge it. That's also false. If you have less than 50 pounds of refrigerant in a system, there are no laws. EPA has no regulations about how often you can recharge it. You could have a leak that's as big as your thumb that you have a tank of R22 connected to running all day long, and the EPA would say nothing about it. Now, I'm not condoning that behavior at all, so don't get me wrong. It's bad. It's a terrible idea, terrible practice. But there's a lot of fear tactics that are around R22, and I would suggest not participating in the fear. And instead, if you want to mention it, say this system, the refrigerant contained is R22, which the prices of it are likely going to continue to increase. Although we've seen in the past 2 years, it's cutting 50%. It's went from $900 per jug we were paying often now down to $450 per jug. And so it's controlled by market forces that none of us fully understand. We do know that in 2020 that we're not going to be able to manufacture new R22, but there's going to be recovered stock that's going to be available for many years to come in the same way that it was with every other refrigerant that's been phased out.
Mm-hmm. Talk about duct sealer. I get this question from a homeowner. Hey, my ductwork needs cleaned, and understand, what should I have it sealed?
Okay, a couple different. That's an interesting one. So things like duct cleaning and duct sealing. It all just depends on what you mean when you say that, and so it's like anything else. It's like being a home inspector. When you're a really good home inspector, you're not the cheapest guy on the block. And that's actually an easy way to tell if a guy's worth anything or not. If they're, charging, $25 for a home inspection, well, then they're not doing a very good job, right? They're not being very thorough.
Something's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the same thing a lot with duct cleaning and duct sealing is that are there people who do clean ducts well? Absolutely. I met with a guy in Austin, actually works with Christoph. And he showed me some pictures, and he's cleaning flex and board, which I am not a big fan of doing duct cleaning on personally. I've read a lot of literature, but he showed me how he's doing it before and after. He talked to me about his practices and how he takes care and all this stuff. And I walked away from my conversation with him like, I would use this guy to clean my flex. I think he knows what he's doing. He's taking care. He's not going to damage anything, but he is 0.0001%. Most of these people are hiring the scare ads, in the mailer, where it shows the dust mites or whatever. Those guys aren't doing a good job of duct cleaning. Same thing with duct sealing. There's great ways to seal ducts, but the fact is that the most common place that ducts leak, and most people don't know this, most common place that ducts leak is where the boot hits whatever it's attached to. So if it's attached to a floor coming out of a crawl space, usually the most common place that it leaks is actually back around that boot into the unconditioned area. Or if it's a ceiling boot, around where that boot hits the drywall. And that's where you start to see that biological growth or that moisture problem around the edges. That's a huge duct leak problem. And most contractors who seal ducts, all they're doing is sealing the outside of the duct where it attaches to the trunk lines and to the triangles. It's not that that's not valuable, but it's in many cases they miss the most important pieces there. The other thing that I'll say is that there are products on the market like AeroSeal, which are internal duct sealants. I've seen tremendous results from AeroSeal. I came into hearing about AeroSeal thinking it was snake oil and garbage, but then the people who are backing it, people like Jim Bergman, who is like probably the smartest guy in HVAC, had it done in his own house, and the results that he saw before and after testing. I believe in AeroSeal. Very expensive product though. So it's gonna set you back a couple grand to get that done, and so you've got to have a pretty compelling reason to do that.
Yeah, very good. Super great info, Bryan. Tell our listeners where folks can learn a little bit more about HVACschool.com.
Yeah, so it's HVACrschool.com. The R, HVAC school is already taken, so I had to add R for refrigeration. So you can go to HVACrschool.com, get all of the podcast, daily tech tips. We have some calculators there. That's where I've got that calculator that talks about the Delta T calculator that might be valuable to you. I have a tool list there. You can go through and see all the professional tools that we use. That may be valuable. The other thing that I'll say, I have some articles on checking the charge without gauges. That's something that I'm going to strongly recommend that home inspectors at least get their head around, even if you don't do it. Even if you're not even if it's not part of your typical report and practice, if you run into a system that you're like, I'm really not sure if this thing's running properly, I would go through that. Another thing I'm going to ask you to do as a home inspector is start using your hands and touching the 2 copper lines that come out of the air conditioner. Now, if it's running in heat mode and it's a heat pump, don't go touching the big line, the suction line, because it's going to be blazing hot. So, take care with that. But in cooling mode, grab your liquid line, grab your suction line, and put your hand over the top of the condenser. If you do that enough to every system that you work on, you're going to become an expert at knowing whether or not air conditioners are having a problem. That's what I do. When I walk up to an air conditioning unit, I'm listening to hear, is it making any abnormal noises? Am I hearing a compressor going on and off erratically? Am I hearing bearing failure? I walk up, I throw my hand over the condenser, because that heat that's coming out of the top of the condenser, that's the heat that came from inside. So if you don't feel, a decent amount of heat, then you want to start looking. Grab that suction line outside. It's usually going to be, significantly cooler than your hand. It may not be 30 degrees, but it's going to be cool. You shouldn't see any ice build up anywhere. Grab that liquid line. It should be slightly warmer than the outdoor temperature. Right there, you did an analysis that almost no home inspector is going to do, and that's what good AC technicians do every day.
Good. Super. Thank you. Appreciate you. Good to have you with us. And for today's Home Inspector in the House, this is Gary Smith. Talk soon.
Thank you, Gary.